This is Luetin, so The Division. I'm going to give my first impressions about the game, and I'll follow this up with a more detailed review. But as I often say, I don't like to give a review in the first 2 weeks of a game release, because I think that you have too much emotion from that, brand new release feel, and that can cloud your objectivity. You need to let some time pass to get a better impression of how it feels and how the community is reacting. I've done much sooner reviews in the past, and I think on reflection those were a bad idea. I think it's better to let a little bit of time pass before you give a proper review of a game, but it's fine to do like a first impressions and keep that sort of in mind. The Division is an odd one for me in that it's probably the game I have felt most torn about. It's the game I've had the most debates with other gamers and other producers about, and those discussions have generally focused around the question, what is The Division? It's an RPG for sure, but what kind of RPG? And what do we even mean by the term RPG? It literally translates to role-playing game, but we aren't just talking about a little translation. When we say RPG, what people think of is gear upgrading, stat comparing, grinding enemies, a continuing narrative, and usually some sort of cooperation. Beyond that though, what do you think of when you think of an RPG? Maybe Final Fantasy, Borderlands, Guild Wars, World of Warcraft, many more. But out of those examples, when you remove the visuals and the narratives and the general themes, The Division, and then also some of the mechanics, The Division seems to be closest there maybe to Borderlands. Still, my expectation and imagining had been something more like a third-person, smaller-scale World of Warcraft. That's just kind of how I had imagined it. Meaning quest grinding combined with more difficult instances. That's actually been fairly accurate apart from one thing, and that's the endgame. Now before we get into some of the other details, the endgame is the biggest bone of contention for me. Now, I can't talk about this too much as I'm not grinding that endgame yet, but from speaking to friends and producers, it seems pretty clear that the endgame currently features no real raids or even majorly challenging instances to complete. There are daily challenges for you to unlock Phoenix credits and thereby unlock better, more elite gear, but these appear to be very much a variation on a theme. I'm quite surprised by this because I genuinely thought we would see several larger and challenging instances. Still, as I say, I will talk about this more in my full review, so whilst it's a concern, let's just put a pin in that. The Division looks astonishing. Its level of detail is nearly unparalleled in other games of this nature. It creates the most convincing and immersive environment of almost any game I've played. The day and night cycle, changing weather conditions and pandemic detritus are seamless and make you feel completely engaged in the world you play in. Similarly, the narrative and small cutscenes, the evidence that you find and uncover throughout leveling help build that picture for you of what has happened and the shared experiences between members of the public and why they're trying to salvage the situation. On the downside though, leveling up is frustratingly repetitive, and grinding is always repetitive. I'm no stranger to grinding, but I am somewhat surprised at just how repeated some of the missions are. You are either completing missions for the medical, tech or security wings of your main base, and these are almost always the same. Rescue hostages, assist JTF forces, secure some objects, kill some rioters, other factions, cleaners. By the time you reach level 15, it's becoming incredibly repetitive, but also necessary. Setting your missions on hard will gain you almost nothing as well. Despite the enemies being significantly more challenging, for example, a normal mission, the enemies are going to be red. On a hard, they're going to be more like purple with armor. Your reward for beating these significantly more difficult enemies, just a few extra credits. That's it. No extra XP, no extra base points. So changing the difficulty of the mission serves really only for your own satisfaction of a more challenging fight. Although it's worth noting as well that if you want to try and fight enemies above your level, once you are fighting anything about 3 levels above you, very often, even if you're surviving, you simply won't do enough damage before you run out of ammo. It's just a stat deal, that's all it is. Such are the limitations of RPG style combat. So stats and gear are just dictating your ability more than skill in some respects, and it feels quite frustrating, especially when it's coming to a kind of third person, and in some cases, if you've got the right optics, first person. It just feels irritating. You're like, I'm landing these shots and the stats are holding you back. And I suppose that's where people's criticism of the bullet sponging comes in. Yes, you can suspend your disbelief and go, okay, we're playing an RPG, but you feel frustrated when you're like, I'm in a good position, I'm getting the shots shots on here, but I'm physically just not doing enough damage. And so the game restrains you and sort of forces you to play in a certain way. Talking about the gear and also crafting, whilst useful periodically, much of it is just rubbish and serves no purpose than just deconstructing or selling. Some crafting patterns will provide you with useful blue items or above. Largely though, crafting below endgame seems largely pointless because, for one thing, you just level up so fast. Similarly, upgrading gear. I just found myself seeing an item I quite like to use. I think, yeah, it's a bit better than what I've got now, but I knew that I had a better piece in my stash that was one level above that I couldn't use, and I was just thinking to myself, well, in 30 minutes to an hour, I'm going to level up and get that gear, so why even bother to change it out? It's not really going to have a significant impact. So I feel like you're losing a large part of the game there because you're just leveling so fast that you're missing the opportunity of like trying out different things, and you're just skipping through it. It just goes so quick. So leveling, as I say, for me, it's so fast. Now granted, I haven't been playing every day since release, hence why I'm not actually level 30 yet, but I would imagine this week with just a few more day play, I'm going to be there, not a problem at all, which to my mind is totally crazy. The leveling in this game is so fast, and it makes me really question, why is that? Why did they decide to enable you to level up so quickly? It's barely even been a week, and some people are already grinding out the endgame content of the base game. So I suppose the question, much as it was with Firewatch, which came out recently, but the game of that game was only 3 hours long. Is getting through a game that fast acceptable or satisfying? Strangely, I find myself saying, yes, I think it is. And there are two ways to look at it. Look at a game like World of Warcraft. Leveling in that game takes literally weeks, if not months, if you're trying to look to get to that endgame level cap. The first half of the leveling is easy, but beyond that, it's a serious grind. You won't find yourself gaining a level a day there. In fact, it took so long in WoW, I remember guildmates congratulating each other when you leveled up. It was something worthy of note. People would be like, hey man, you dinged. You know, it was a good deal. In the Division, it's not so. For example, Supra, who as you know is part of my regular squad, having purchased the game 2 days after me, has already blitzed past me in the levels. That's how fast you level. There are positives and negatives to this. For one thing, it's easier for everyone to then reach that end game and catch up to each other without spending weeks grinding it out and ensuring that you keep that level balance between friends, because sometimes people rush ahead, they're behind, you can catch up, you can play together more easily, so that's a good thing. Another, I feel like in 2016, many people just got so many games on the go, I know I have, that there just isn't the time or inclination to grind and grind, as maybe there was in the past, generally speaking, that is. And again, that's something that was quite appealing to me about Firewatch. From one aspect, I was like, oh, I'm frustrated, I didn't want this game to end. From another, I was like, I'm really glad I've finished this game, because now I can continue playing other things. So it kind of goes both ways. On the negative side though, it makes many of your decisions just seem largely pointless when it comes to gear upgrading. And for example, I nearly skipped over 2 whole areas in the early stage of the game because I was just leveling up from random street encounters. I didn't even need to follow any of these side missions. So again, you're losing huge sections of content there because there's simply no purpose. If you had to go in and really, complete those areas and do those side missions and find all the bits and pieces, you'd feel maybe, more engaged with the stuff that you're doing there. You'd feel like each section that you moved on to was like a real move, a step forward and engagement into that section. But it's not. You can kind of just run around and do whatever you want to. But, that kind of non-linear style fashion is actually quite good, The way in which you level means that you quickly access different areas. You don't have to do the missions in any set order. That's a nice thing. The actual non-linear style of the way the missions play out works really well, and I actually think it's been done better than I've seen in other games of a similar sort of style when it comes to that kind of open style of completing missions. But leveling, it seems so fast that it is somewhat unsatisfying. It doesn't feel like a goal to reach. It's just a check mark as you fly past toward the seemingly thin, or apparently thin, endgame content. But fear not, because as we know, a DLC is coming very quickly after release. Excellent! Well, not really. I usually find myself rolling my eyes at people who say things like, oh my god, they didn't release this as part of the main game, so they could just sell us a DLC. But with the Division, it's actually starting to make me feel like that is genuinely the case. I want to wait and see for myself just how much endgame content is available. But as I say, I've spoken to people that are playing it, and it doesn't sound greatly encouraging. So is The Division just a loot upgrade fest? This was my biggest concern before the game released, and it was my biggest question going into it. It's what made me leave World of Warcraft after 5 years of solid playing, because I realised that all I was doing at that point was beating raid bosses to get gear to beat the next raid boss, and then that just cycle was going on and on. There needed to be some greater purpose there, either in PvP or in narrative. Now there is narrative in The Division, so we will see later if that lives up to fulfilling some sense of endgame justification. Perhaps The Division is not a game in the same sense that I am imagining other RPGs. I'll fully admit that I find it hard to disconnect from my experiences in World of Warcraft, and it makes sense. That was, it's maybe a quarter of my gaming life, maybe a fifth of my gaming life, just playing one game. So it's naturally quite difficult for me when I'm playing a game of a comparative style to completely disconnect and not make comparisons there. So I maybe have like a bit of a chip on my shoulder, a bit of a bias there that I just can't let go of. So perhaps the way we need to view The Division is more of an episodic experience. That's a term I've been thinking about a lot today, and I think to my mind it suits the way in which this game is built the best. You complete this first episode, you grind it a bit to the end to have suitable gear to be able to engage with the next narrative episode, and then so on through the other DLCs, each one being like a section that you play on through. The mechanics of this game are something that I've especially enjoyed. I'm not a huge fan of third-person games, but The Division has really, the combat, it just flows. I feel very focused, enjoying every second of it, coordinating with friends, working together to complete that combat. I only have a few small gripes in that sometimes when using the cover system it can be a bit glitchy, trying to disengage from a wall you're leaning against. Also with grenade throws, I wish you could throw them more acutely, round a corner, tighter to the wall when you're, say, breaching with a flashbang or a gas grenade. Overall though, the combat I feel like it's a triumph. I love moving cover to cover, outflanking enemy, changing through weapons, grenades, healing, the perk system. It all works brilliantly, and it's the shining aspect of this game for me. Now there is one section I have deliberately not spoken about to this point, and that is the Dark Zone. Why? I haven't even gone into the Dark Zone yet. For one reason, I've had literally no purpose to go into there. For another reason, in the first few days of playing, we were hearing rumours, and then, Fuse and Flame, the guys who were actually in there, were saying that what was happening was you would go into the lower level sections of the Dark Zone, and there were guys that were just like level 25, just hanging around, like, let's be frank, fucking people up and just like absolutely destroying them. Not very, very good indeed. Apparently the way in which the Dark Zone functions is very different to the beta. In the beta, it was sort of bracketed to your level, so when you're running around, you'd find people of a similar level. But the way in which the Dark Zone works now is very much like the rest of the city. The sections are built in that if you're in like a level 20 to 25 to 30, whatever, okay, the AI, the NPCs around there are going to be basically of that similar level, so you're going to be fighting enemies at that level, but there is nothing to stop you just running into lower level areas, very much like in the PvE side, the more open side of things, right? So what was happening was you would just find these high level guys who were just hanging around, just wrecking people. That to me seems an absolutely appalling decision from the devs. I guess because they didn't want to make it feel they don't want this game to feel sort of trapped and fragmented. They want it to feel open and that you can just kind of move around. But you've got to be able to see that that is a very, very clear and obvious thing that's going to happen. Now, I don't know whether it's... The reason I have avoided it this first week, as I say, is largely I've had no purpose to go in there. I'm doing the PvE stuff, I'm grinding up to the top level, there's no reason to go in there and get that gear. And actually from another perspective, that also seems a bit of a weird one, it's like, yeah, you can go in there, but to what end? To get some other gear that you're going to level up past in like half an hour? And this is where this kind of, the leveling speed for me comes back again. It's like you don't have any real purpose to do any part of that section of content because there's just no need, and you go so fast through it. By the time you've gone over there and done a load of stuff and gone back and you've got some gear, well, hey, maybe again that means you're not going to be bothering to pick up gear from other areas. Like the speed of the game I find is quite counterintuitive to actually having a great experience from many aspects. So I feel like, yes, there are positives in terms of leveling up quickly and pushing through to other areas, but I feel like the negatives outweigh that and actually kind of inhibit your enjoyment of the experience overall from many different aspects, from the loot, to just playing with friends, to a diversity of experiences in a PvE aspect as well. So the Dark Zone, we'll see, I'll get into it later, but again, I feel it's a shame. I've been very dissuaded. We've been in and had like a little look around in there. Flame said that he had some good experience as well, hooked up with some guys, and they were like, hey, let's help you out, man, let's go do some bits and pieces. Great, good stuff. But again, I just feel very just not enthused. I don't feel a great challenge to go in there. And then also, just let's talk really quickly about the PvP aspect. The whole PvP aspect with the Dark Zone I find is really odd anyway. I mean, it's not like DayZ or other style games like this where you're sort of out and about in these apocalypse situations and you see some guys and you're like, yeah, let's have a battle with them. Because there's negative connotations to engaging other players. Also, it's a bit of a piss take in the way that, you can do like an entire sort of mini instance essentially to get some great gear, and then someone just comes and shoots you and takes it from you. So it's kind of like, I'm not really sure I like that dynamic. And again, maybe it's just a personal thing, but the whole way in which that's been constructed, I'm not really feeling it. And again, depending on how we'll push through when we get to the end game, get some of the gear, move in and around there, I just don't know. I mean, when we were playing the beta, we had some really exciting situations there. Sometimes we had some cool guys and we're like, hey, let's just keep it cool. Other times we'd have like these running battles in the street. So I'm sure that there can be some fun experiences there for sure. But I think that in combination with the other aspects of the way the game has been working, I'm just not sure. And as I say, it's really sort of dissuaded me from trying to get in there early on because of the fact that, those rumours. I was like, okay, we'll look at this Dark Zone, but we'll look at it later, because I'm just not in the mood for being camped out by some level 25 guys. And also, let me just tell you, I am no stranger to being camped out by other people. It's happened to me on various games in PvP aspects. Sometimes it's been me getting my way, sometimes it's been other people keeping you down. It just goes both ways. So I don't know, but I just didn't want to deal with that this week. I was very happy just doing my PvE side of things. So the Division, it's a bit of an oddball for me. Some things I absolutely love. I'm a huge fan of apocalypse set environments. The combat system is fantastic. The narrative, while sometimes fairly predictable, pop culture does a good job and isn't overtly cheesy. Concerns for me are the speed of leveling, tedious repetition, and the impact this has on other mechanics, like I said, like crafting and general loot upgrading. My overall conclusion at this stage is the game is well worth its money, but I think an important caveat to that is that this game is perhaps more subjective than any I can think of. On the whole, it seems that people are loving it, so that's a good sign. I think perhaps I'm still suffering the burnout of 5 years of nothing but hardcore endgame World of Warcraft. So maybe it's not so much that this game doesn't fit me as much as I don't fit this game. Full review coming up in a week or two. Thanks for watching, guys. Please tell me your thoughts on the Division so far down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, always hit that like. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.